cold night, hard as steel. A torn wash of yellow light on the wet concrete wall cut through the steam of men's breath as they ringed the new girl. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She stood still, eyes level, the look of someone used to being pushed into corners. A pistol pressed against her temple. A voice came rough and filthy. Then another voice cut in, thin, shaking, but final. "Stop! She's Alpha Zero." The air locked in place. Fingers tightened on triggers, then hesitated, as if that name had just been said aloud when it never should be. The forward base had been thrown together in a hollow of burned woods, a line of prefab structures behind a row of HESCO barriers. Rain had frozen into needles on the wire. The warehouse corridor sat at the edge of the compound, an unfinished slab that collected damp and echoed every step. That was where they sent the new arrival. No welcome, no brief, just a cot and a locker with a broken latch. Her name on the roster was Claire Morgan. She had no photo on the wall, no hometown in the admin file, and the medical intake was scrubbed of everything but blood type. She moved through the compound like she was counting angles. She looked at door hinges and vent grates more than faces. At night she kept her jacket zipped and her hood up, and she took the late watch no one wanted. She asked for nothing except a place to stow her gear and the next assignment. The men who ran the warehouse detail were not bad soldiers, but they were tired. And they were angry. Their schedule had been broken by weather, by supply delays, and by commanders they never saw. They saw a woman moved into their section without explanation, and they decided she was being sheltered. Or worse, that she was a burden. There was a way they talked when they thought no one important was within earshot, and it always had an edge of dare in it. Blake Rourke was the loudest of them. He was old enough to have a line of white at his temples, and young enough to believe the rules bent for him. He had been burned once in a bad raid, and he had made sure everyone knew it. He called Claire New Girl, like it was a stain. He did not ask where she came from. He said she had better learn who mattered. She did not answer him. Her gaze tracked the loose cable on the ceiling, the puddle at the end of the hall, the way the metal door swelled with cold. She held herself as if she had spent years in rooms where silence kept people alive. Rourke took that for weakness. He thought stillness was fear. The first shove was small and meant to be funny. She absorbed it without wobble, boots locked, weight set, and kept her hands where anyone could see them. The second shove put her against the wall. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move her hands. That made the laughter stop and start in the same breath. Men who want a reaction do not like to be ignored. By the time the night of the storm rolled in, the corridor smelled of wet wool and fuel. The lights buzzed, the roof wrapped with sleet. A half-dozen men had drifted into the warehouse just to get out of the wind, and they found her on the far side stacking crates by herself. They spread out until she had no clear line to the door. Rourke stepped in close enough for his breath to fog against her cheek. He spoke low and dirty, close enough that the others could see her face and read her response. They wanted her to fold, to bargain, to give them something they could mock. She stayed quiet. The silence made one of them laugh, but the laugh didn't sound sure. A few yards back, a young man in a wet parka hesitated at the edge of the circle. His name was Ethan Cole, and he was on his first rotation with this unit after finishing the pipeline. His hands were red from the cold, and his eyes were wide with the kind of caution that comes from too many cautionary stories. He had heard stories in training, half fact, half myth, about a call sign that wasn't in any briefing and never on paper. The instructors called it Alpha Zero, and they never explained it. He told himself it was nothing. The new girl was just another body they could assign to the dull jobs. But then he saw the way her fingers lifted and brushed her wrist. A simple touch, not nervous and not random, like checking a pulse under pressure. He had seen that habit once before in a survival module when they showed a clip of a medic working in a hot zone. He had never seen it among regular line operators. Rourke kept talking. The words were crude and meant to grind her down. He leaned in and tapped the side of her head with a finger, a touch that was not yet a hit, a provocation designed to see if she would flinch. She did not. Her eyes stayed open and steady, tracking something past him like the geometry of the room mattered more than his face. The pistol came out then, not in a formal threat, but in the casual way some men use weapons to make a point. Rourke pressed the muzzle against her temple. It was just pressure, just a demonstration, but the metal was cold and the risk in it was real. The others tensed, some amused, some uneasy. No one stepped in. They were tired of being told to keep their heads down, and they did not want to become targets themselves. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He could hear the rain, the buzz of the overhead lamp, and the faint click of the safety as Rourke's thumb brushed it. The line between rough talk and irreversible action had narrowed to a breath. Claire did not blink. She did not talk. She stayed perfectly still, and the stillness carried its own warning, like a wire pulled taut. She watched the room with a soldier's habit, not a victim's. Ethan found himself stepping forward a half-pace. His boots scraped wet concrete. Rourke turned his head enough to see him and snapped a glare that said, "Back off." Ethan stopped. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, waiting to see if he would push it. He weighed the cost of being wrong against the cost of doing nothing. In his memory, the instructor's voice came back from a dark classroom. The man had been a retired chief, face blank, words measured. He had said that Alpha Zero was not a rank or a medal. It was a condition. The last resort, the one call sign never to be spoken unless everything had already failed. The stories about it ended in silence, as if the silence itself was part of the lesson. Ethan looked at Claire again. Her posture was too controlled. Her breathing was too even. She wasn't a tourist in this world. She had been built by it. She shifted her weight, tiny, precise, to keep the muzzle's line from crossing the softest point at her temple. It was a move so small no one would notice unless they were trained to see it. He noticed. Rourke smiled the way men smile when they think they've won. He kept the pistol where it was. He was going to drag this out, make her answer, make her submit. The others leaned in, hungry for a break from the monotony, for a story they could tell later. The moment stretched, a single second pulled thin as wire. Ethan had to choose. He could swallow his doubt and stay quiet. Let the night close over the corridor, like it had over so many things before. Or he could speak a word that was never meant for this room, never meant for this group. And if he was wrong, he would be mocked, punished, sidelined. If he was right, something else would happen, something with weight, something that would stop this. He drew in a breath. The air burned cold in his lungs. He stepped forward just enough that his voice would carry. The word formed in the space behind his teeth. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. He opened his mouth. "Stop, she's Alpha Zero." The sound cut across the corridor like a blade. For a beat, no one moved. The rain kept ticking on the roof. The light kept buzzing. Then the smallest shifts rippled through the circle. A jaw tightened, a shoulder dropped, a gaze slid away. Rourke's smile faltered, not in fear, but in calculation. He hadn't heard the name before, but he recognized the way the room responded to it. Claire's eyes moved, not to Ethan, but to the hand on the pistol, measuring pressure, waiting for a decision. The world held its breath. Rourke finally eased the muzzle away a fraction, not because he believed, but because the name had hit the room and made it heavier. He wanted to be the one in control, and he felt control sliding. He masked it with a scoff. The others watched him, and in their faces he saw doubt. He was not used to doubt. Ethan did not say anything more. He had said the only word that mattered. His pulse hammered in his ears, and he waited for the backlash. Rourke turned the pistol sideways in his palm, letting the light catch the barrel, making sure everyone saw it was still his. His expression hardened, then softened into a smile that did not reach his eyes. He leaned closer to Claire, but he did not touch her. He was doing the math now, weighing his pride against the risk of being wrong. A second man, Grant Halverson, shifted his stance. Grant had been in longer than Rourke, and he had seen enough to know that some names carried consequences. He did not step forward, but he didn't laugh either. The circle loosened just enough for air to move. Claire spoke at last, one line, quiet and flat, the kind of voice that ends a conversation by not giving it more than it needs. Lower the weapon. It was not a plea. It was a command. It did not rise or fall. It simply landed. Rourke's jaw clenched. He lowered the pistol, but he did it as if he were putting it away by choice. He told himself he was still in charge. He told himself he was not taking orders from a woman with no file. The tension didn't break. It shifted. The men backed off in small steps, some with relief, some with annoyance, but all with the sense that a line had been crossed. Ethan felt the air warm again in his lungs. Claire turned away first. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at Rourke. She walked back to her stack of crates and continued to work, her movements measured and quiet. The men left the corridor in small groups, not talking, their boots leaving wet prints on the concrete. Ethan lingered. He needed to know if he had just saved her, or if he had made an error he would pay for. He watched her hands as she adjusted the straps on a pallet, as if the answer might be in the way she moved. Her fingers were scarred, old scars, small and linear, the kind that came from metal and cord and cold weather. She worked in silence, the way people do when the work matters more than who is watching. When he finally left the corridor, he went to the far end of the compound, to a bench under a broken light. He sat in the cold and thought about the name he had said. Alpha Zero had been a myth in his training, but the look in Grant's eyes had been real, and the way the room had shifted had been real. Myths did not move men like that. He had no idea what it meant. The next day brought grey sky and icy wind. The base took in a small convoy, a few cases of supplies, and a replacement radio. The officer in charge of logistics, Captain Mark Hensley, kept his head down and moved fast, and he did not look at Claire when he passed her in the yard. She moved with the rest of the detail, quiet, efficient, and never in the way. The men who had surrounded her the night before watched her out of the corner of their eyes. Rourke kept his distance. He was not soft. He was not ashamed. But he was waiting, and his waiting was a kind of warning. Ethan could see it every time they crossed paths. That evening the weather worsened, and the base went to blackout. The light in the warehouse corridor went dark, leaving only the dim glow of emergency strips near the floor. The air smelled of wet concrete, oil and cold. Claire sat at a small table and checked gear, methodical, hands steady. Ethan found himself nearby, pretending to clean a rifle he had already cleaned. He wanted to ask questions. He did not. In their world, asking the wrong question could be a mistake you could not erase. A pair of men came in, both on guard detail, both in a sour mood. One of them, Lucas Van, was younger and less sure than Rourke, but he had followed Rourke's lead for weeks. He glanced at Claire and smirked. He said something that sounded like a joke, but it landed like a jab. She did not look up. He tried again. Nothing. He rolled his eyes and moved on, but Ethan felt the edge in the room. The night passed without incident, but Ethan slept light and woke early. He walked the perimeter at dawn, watched the frost settle on the barriers, and wondered what he had stepped into. He had thought his first rotation would be about learning the work. He had not expected to collide with something he could not name. On the third day, the base received a warning. A patrol outside their wire had gone dark. Radio checks failed. The report was short and cold, a line in the morning brief. They were to stay alert. The compound tightened. The men in the warehouse were told to keep equipment ready. Tension settled into the compound like the weather. Claire checked the radios, ran a quick test, and tightened a strap on her vest. She did not ask for instructions. She moved as if she already knew what was coming. Rourke saw it and scowled. He had never liked people who moved like they were above orders. He didn't trust quiet confidence, especially when it came from someone he didn't know. That afternoon, Ethan overheard a conversation between Grant and another senior operator, Miles Avery. They spoke in low tones in the mess, not looking at each other. "A name like that doesn't get thrown around," Grant said. "I know," Miles replied. "Then what is she doing here?" She's here because somebody wants her here, that's all I know. Ethan kept walking, his tray in his hands, his mind working. The name had come from his mouth, but he did not own it. It was bigger than him, bigger than Rourke, maybe bigger than the base itself. It sat in his thoughts like a live wire. That night he saw Claire outside the warehouse, alone under a broken floodlight. She was scanning the tree line with binoculars, pausing, moving on. The wind peeled at her jacket, and she didn't react. She was not on watch, not officially. She was doing it anyway. He wanted to ask why. He didn't. A few minutes later, he heard the faint ping of metal and saw her glance down toward a drainage grate. She stepped closer, and he watched her kneel, touch the grate with 2 fingers, and lift a slender piece of wire that had not been there earlier. She did not show it to anyone. She put it in her pocket. Ethan's skin chilled. The patrol outside the wire had gone dark. Someone had come close. He walked back to the barracks and found the officer of the watch. He said what he saw without embellishment. The officer nodded and sent a message to the command post. The base increased readiness. The night deepened. The next morning, a team went out to find the missing patrol. They returned with only 2 men, cold and stunned. The others were missing. The command post held a briefing. Rourke stood at the back and glared at the floor. Ethan sat on the bench and kept his hands still. Claire sat near the wall, hood up, eyes on the map. The commander, Major Samuel Hart, spoke in a flat voice. He said they would go after the missing men. He said they would move at last light. He did not look at Claire. He did not need to. She already knew where she would be. The base began to move. Gear was distributed. The warehouse opened. People loaded packs. The air buzzed with routine tension. Ethan heard Rourke mutter to Lucas that this was a mess, that they should stay inside, that the missing patrol was already gone. Lucas nodded but looked uneasy. Claire checked a radio and handed it to a team leader without a word. She adjusted her straps and walked to a section of the warehouse with spare batteries. She moved like someone who knew the difference between a clean plan and a real one. The operation was delayed by the weather, and then delayed again by a power issue. By the time they were ready to go, night had taken hold. The base was under a cold, wet sky, and the trees beyond the wire looked like black teeth. Before they stepped out, Rourke cornered Claire near the exit. He kept his voice low enough not to attract a superior, but his posture was a challenge. He said he did not answer to her, that she had no authority. He said he had fought longer than she had existed. He said he was not impressed by rumors. Claire did not answer. She took a breath and said a single line, her voice low and final. "Stay on the line and keep the cadence." It was not a threat. It was instruction. Rourke smirked and turned away, but his eyes flicked to Ethan, and in that glance was the promise of a reckoning. Ethan said nothing. He had a rifle in his hands and a weight in his chest. They left the wire in a file, moving between trees, a line of shadow. The wind carried the smell of wet pine. The ground was slick, and every step had to be measured. The night was hard, the kind that turns sound into a knife. Claire moved at the center, not at the front. She watched the line, watched the spacing, kept her head swiveling. She did not try to lead. She led by action, by the way she placed her feet and scanned the ground. Ethan watched her from 2 positions back. He tried to match her cadence. He knew she was reading more than he was. He knew she was carrying more weight than her pack. They found the missing patrol's tracks an hour out. The signs were subtle. A broken branch, a scuffed boot print, a drop of mud where none should be. Claire pointed once, and then the line tightened. They moved on. An hour later, they found a burned vehicle. It had been stripped of anything useful. The ground around it was marked with drag lines. The missing men had been taken, alive or not, and the trail was going into a ravine. The commander ordered a halt. He said they would not go deeper at night. The ravine was narrow and would be a trap. He said they would mark the position and return with daylight. It was a sound order. Everyone knew it. Claire looked at the ground, then at the tree line. She did not argue. She nodded once and stepped back. The line turned and moved to return. The air had that feeling again. the one before a shift in pressure. Halfway back they heard the first shot. A crack from the left, then another from high ground. The line dropped instinct. The night filled with bursts of light. The enemy was not massing. It was probing, testing the line, trying to pull them into a kill zone. Claire moved down the line, low, hand signals quick. She ordered a withdrawal in short, clipped gestures. It wasn't a retreat. It was a peel, disciplined and tight. Ethan followed her hand without thinking. Rourke hesitated, wanted to push forward, but Grant seized his sleeve and pulled him back in line. They moved, stop and go, using trees as cover. The shots followed, then eased. The enemy was not strong. They were smart. They wanted to mark the unit, to learn it, to hurt it. The line made it back to the wire, cold, wet, and intact. No one died. That was a win, but it did not feel like one. Back inside the compound, the commander held a debrief. He praised the discipline, noted the contact, and ordered increased security. Rourke took the note in silence, his jaw set. He wanted to say something about pressing the attack. He did not. Ethan cleaned his rifle and watched Claire from across the room. She was not shaking. She was not triumphant. She had the calm of someone who had been here before and expected nothing else. He felt the weight of that. Later in the small hours, Ethan heard voices near the motor pool. He moved toward them, saw a sliver of light under a door. Inside, Major Hart and Captain Hensley were looking at a map. Claire stood by the wall, quiet, arms crossed. The commander did not dismiss her. He spoke to her in short commands, and she nodded. That was unusual. She was a junior in the roster, but she was in the room. Ethan moved away without being seen. He did not need to hear the words. He had seen the dynamic. There was authority there that did not wear a patch. The next day, security tightened. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before pressure. Claire moved among the teams, checking gear, confirming radio channels, assigning sectors without making a show of it. She kept her tone calm and minimal. The men followed her directions, sometimes without realizing they had been directed. Rourke chafed. He had been told to hold a sector, and he didn't like it. He wanted action, movement, a visible role. When the alarms came at mid-afternoon, he pushed forward without waiting for the call. He was a few steps ahead when Claire stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Hold," she said. The word stopped him. He turned, ready to argue, but she had already moved, directing the rest of the line into cover. The alarm was not an attack. It was a breach signal from the outer sensors. One tripped wire, one ping. The base went to readiness, but no one fired. Claire ordered a quiet sweep. The team moved out and found a decoy, a wire attached to a metal can, a tease to draw them out. She marked it and told the commander. The commander adjusted the perimeter. Rourke fumed. He called it paranoia. He said they were letting the enemy play them. Ethan watched the exchange and noted that no one contradicted Claire. That told him more than any rumor. That evening, Ethan found a quiet corner and pulled out his notebook, a field journal he kept for operational notes. He wrote a line. Alpha Zero equals the person who sees traps before they spring. It was not an official definition, but it fit what he had seen. When the next contact came, it was not a firefight but an interruption. The radio in the command post hissed. Then a single encrypted burst came through. The code was not from their unit. It was not from a higher command. Claire walked into the command post, asked for the radio, and when the operator hesitated, she glanced at him, and he handed it over. She listened for 30 seconds, then handed it back and walked out. Major Hart followed her, and the two of them spoke out of earshot. 5 minutes later, the base went to full lockdown. The gates were sealed. The vehicles were moved into covered positions. The quiet turned to tension. No one knew why. No one asked. At night, the storm broke, wind tearing through the trees and rain coming down hard. The power flickered. The compound's generator caught and held, but the lights dimmed. People moved between buildings with hoods up and heads down. The warehouse corridor was empty. Claire sat on a crate, tightening her gloves. Ethan watched from the doorway. He had questions, but he knew his place. The silence between them was thick, yet he felt he was part of it now. He had said the name. He had taken the step. He had placed a small stone in the path. And now he was walking the consequences. Rourke entered with Lucas and another man, Nolan Pierce. They looked at Claire, then at Ethan. Rourke's voice was low and controlled. He said he wanted to talk. Just the men, just for a minute. It was a request disguised as a threat. Claire did not look up. She said a single line. "Speak." Rourke hesitated, then said he wanted to know who she was. He said he wanted to know why the commander listened to her. He said if she was going to take space in their team, she owed them something. Claire paused. She was not going to explain. She was not going to argue. She said, "You don't need my file to do your job." The answer made Rourke's eyes flash. He took a step closer, and for a moment it looked like the night of the corridor would repeat. Ethan shifted his weight. Nolan glanced at the door. Lucas stared at the floor. Claire did not move. Her face was still. Her posture was firm. It was not a stance of dominance. It was a stance of readiness. She was not challenging him. She was letting him choose. Rourke looked at her, then at Ethan, then at Nolan. He exhaled through his nose, a sound like he was backing away from a cliff. He stepped back. He did not apologize. He did not submit. He walked out. After they left, Claire stood and checked her weapon. Ethan watched her with a new kind of understanding. She had never needed to prove anything in a room like that. She had survived enough to know when to use words and when not to. The next operation came sooner than expected. Intelligence arrived late in the night. The missing men were believed to be held in a farm compound along a ridge, guarded but not heavily. The plan was to move before dawn, strike fast, and pull out before the enemy could respond. It was a risky plan, but the pressure to recover the men was high. Major Hart gathered his team in the command post, faces lit by map screens. He assigned roles quickly. Claire was given responsibility for the extraction corridor, a role that carried weight and risk. Rourke's jaw set when he heard it, but he did not object. Ethan was assigned to Claire's element. They left the wire in darkness. The rain had eased, but the wind still cut. The ground was slick, and the air carried the smell of wet soil. They moved in silence, heads down. Every step had to be measured. The line moved like a single organism. As they approached the ridge, Claire halted the line and held a hand up. She scanned the slope with night optics, then motioned the line forward in a slow, staggered pattern. She was adjusting their angle to avoid a low wire she had seen, a trip line that would have set off an alarm. Ethan saw it only after she pointed. The line shifted and avoided it. They reached the outer edge of the farm compound before first light. The buildings were dark. The animals in the pens were still. A guard moved near the main structure, a silhouette against a faint light. The team froze. Claire signaled the rear to hold. She watched the guard's route, waited for a gap, then moved the line forward in a quick, controlled push. The breach was clean, quiet. The team entered the outer yard and moved along the wall. The plan was to access a side door. Claire moved to the back, covering the corridor, her rifle steady. Ethan was at her right, watching the tree line. Inside, the assault team found 2 of the missing men, alive but tied. The others were gone. The team extracted them quickly. The plan was to pull out along a gully to the east. Claire moved to the mouth of the gully to secure the route. That was when the first flare went up. It burst over the trees, washing the yard in white. The enemy had been waiting. Shots snapped from the ridge. The team was caught between open yard and low cover. The extraction corridor was the only clear path. Claire motioned the line toward the gully with a sharp command. "Move!" It was the only word she spoke. The team moved, low, fast. Ethan covered the left flank. Rourke moved toward the right, then hesitated, tempted to push forward for a fight. Claire grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back. The action was quick and firm, no debate. They ran through the gully, down a narrow channel lined with rocks. The flare died. The night returned. The enemy's shots followed, then fell off. The team slipped into the trees and moved hard for the wire. They made it back with the recovered men, cold and exhausted. It was a success, but only narrowly. The base was quiet again, but the quiet was filled with a new awareness. The men had seen Claire in a live situation, had seen how she moved and how she decided. That changed the way they looked at her. Rourke did not speak to her after the operation, not directly. He took his report to Major Hart and left the room. He looked older than he had before, not in the face but in the posture. He had been pulled back from his own impulse, and he did not like it. But he had also seen how close they had been to disaster. Ethan sat with the recovered men in the infirmary, listening as the medic checked them. He watched Claire walk through the hall, a quick nod to the medic, a glance at the map on the wall, then out into the cold. She moved like someone who had no time to spend on the wrong things. The next 2 days were tense. The enemy had been bolder. The base expected a response. Claire helped adjust the guard rotations, pushed for tighter comms, and organized a set of fallback positions. She did it quietly, without claiming credit. The commander accepted her recommendations without debate. That was not normal. Everyone noticed. One afternoon, Ethan found her in the warehouse, standing over a box of old equipment. She was holding a small metal tag, a piece of gear with an engraved code. He recognized the format. It was a command authorization stamp, a relic from an old program. He had seen it once in a classified briefing. The code ended with a 0. She slid the tag back into the box and closed it. She did not see him. Or she saw him and decided not to acknowledge it. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. That night, Rourke approached Ethan in the yard. He said he wanted to know what Ethan knew. Ethan told him nothing. He said he had only said a name, and he did not know the rest. Rourke stared at him for a long moment and then walked away. Hours later, alarms wailed across the compound. The outer wire had been breached. The base went into full response. Lights came on in red. People ran to positions. The sound of engines started, then stopped as orders came to lock down. It was not a full attack. It was a probe, coordinated and sharp. Claire was already moving. She issued short commands directing teams to secondary positions. She did not ask for permission. She did not hesitate. The men followed because her directions matched the flow of the fight. Rourke was at the east barrier with his team when he saw a shadow move along the fence line. He stepped out from cover to get a better angle, and in that second a shot cracked. It was not a hit, but it forced him to drop. The action exposed his position. The enemy's fire shifted toward his sector. He was pinned. Claire saw it. She moved laterally, low, and signaled Ethan and another operator, Owen Harper, to shift. They moved together, drew the enemy's attention, and gave Rourke's team a chance to move. It was a simple maneuver, clean and disciplined. The enemy's fire slackened. The probe ended, as if it had been enough to mark the base. When the all clear came, the compound exhaled. Rourke stood under the light, breathing hard. He looked at Claire. He said nothing. The look was different now. It was not respect, not yet, but it had lost the edge of contempt. The next morning, a helicopter came in with a small team and a sealed package. The pilot did not use the regular radio. He landed, handed the package to Major Hart, and left. No one else saw what was inside. The major took it to the command post and called Claire in. The door closed. No one spoke about it. That afternoon, Ethan saw Claire with a different patch on her shoulder, not on her uniform but on a bag she carried. It was a simple circle with a line through it, almost blank. He remembered a slide from training, a symbol that had been flashed quickly before the instructor moved on, a symbol tied to a program that existed only in rumors. He felt the pieces click together in his mind. The days blurred into a rhythm of readiness. The base held. The enemy probed and withdrew. The missing men were accounted for. The 2 recovered, the rest confirmed lost. The weight of that truth sat on the base like frost. Claire did not speak of it. She moved on. One evening, the power failed for a moment, then returned. In the darkness, Ethan heard a door open and close, then footsteps on concrete. He followed the sound and found Claire in the warehouse, standing by a line of lockers. She was checking a piece of gear that looked older than the rest, a radio with a scratched casing. She adjusted the frequency, listened, and said nothing. Ethan stepped forward and asked in a low voice, "Is Alpha Zero a rank?" She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were calm, not hard, not soft. She said a single line, "It's a call you don't make unless you're out of options." He nodded. It was not an answer, and it was everything. He did not press. The next week, the base received an order to move a convoy of supplies through a valley that had been watched for months. The mission was necessary and dangerous. Major Hart assigned Rourke's team to lead, with Claire in support. Rourke did not like it. He wanted command, not support. He did not argue. They moved at first light, vehicles low in the lane, dust rising. The valley walls closed in, and the road bent around a rock face. Claire rode in the second vehicle, scanning with optics. Ethan sat behind her, watching the road. Halfway through the valley, Claire saw something on the ridge. An unnatural line, a faint glint. She signaled a halt. The convoy slowed. Rourke's vehicle rolled to a stop. He signaled back, impatient. She signaled again. Halt! The convoy stopped. Silence dropped. The men watched the ridge. A second later, a blast of dirt kicked up where the lead vehicle had been heading. The charge had been set for a moving target. The halt had saved the convoy. Rourke looked back at Claire. He raised a hand, a tight gesture that acknowledged the call. He did not say a word. The convoy reversed and took an alternate route, losing time but keeping men alive. That was a win in their world. Back at the base, the men had to unload and secure the supplies under the threat of another probe. Claire directed traffic, her voice steady. She did not show satisfaction. She did not hold the save over anyone's head. She moved on. That night, Rourke approached her outside the warehouse. The air was cold and still. He stood at a respectful distance. He said, "You saved the line today." It was as close to a concession as he could manage. Claire nodded once. She did not answer. Rourke held her gaze, then looked away. He said, "I was wrong." He did not add more. He did not need to. She said, "Don't do that to the next one." It was a simple line, no judgment, no anger. He nodded. The exchange ended. Ethan watched from a distance. The shift had happened, slow and earned. It was not redemption. It was a recalibration. The base was learning how to function around a kind of authority that had nothing to do with rank. In the days that followed, the enemy grew bolder. A scout team reported movement closer to the wire. Sensors tripped in multiple locations. The base increased patrols. The pressure built. Claire called a brief meeting with the team leads. She spoke in short, clear directives. Adjust the patrol pattern, rotate security positions, set fallback points. She did not explain why. She did not need to. The rationale was embedded in her decisions. The men followed. Ethan asked Grant later what he thought Alpha Zero meant. Grant shook his head and said, "It's not a person. It's a condition. It's when the rulebook fails and you need someone who knows how to improvise without breaking the mission." That night the base was hit. It wasn't a full assault. It was a coordinated strike. A diversion meant to draw out defenders. Shots cracked from the tree line. The alarm sounded. Teams moved to positions. Claire moved with them, her commands crisp, each one tied to a goal. Rourke's team took the brunt. A flare burst over the east fence. The enemy's fire concentrated. Rourke wanted to push out beyond the wire, to hit back, to force the enemy to break. Claire ordered him to hold, to let the enemy show their hand. He hesitated. The seconds stretched. Then he obeyed. The enemy's fire slackened as if they had been waiting for a charge. They wanted him outside the wire. They wanted him exposed. The hold had saved the team again. Rourke's shoulders lowered and he took a breath, a sign of trust. When the attack faded, the base remained tense. No one slept much. The men were tired, and the tiredness wore on their edges. That was when mistakes happened, when arrogance could be fatal. The next day, Rourke made a mistake. He pushed a patrol route outside the plan, chasing a faint trail he believed was an enemy path. He thought he could prove his worth by taking initiative. Claire found out before he left the wire. She confronted him in the yard. She did not yell. She said, "That path is bait. They want you out there." It was a statement, not a debate. Rourke said he had his reasons. He said he knew the ground. He said he would not be handled. He took a step as if to move past her. She did not block him. She simply said, "If you break cadence, you risk the team." He stopped. The words did not shame him. They framed the cost. He turned away from the wire and rejoined the plan. It was a hard decision for him, but it was the right one. Later, Ethan sat with him in the mess. The lights dim, the room cold. Rourke said, "She's not here for us." Ethan didn't answer, but he understood. Claire was not there to be liked or to be defended. She was there because something had already gone wrong somewhere else, and she had been sent to hold the line. That night, Claire stood in the command post and listened to a second encrypted burst. She wrote down a set of coordinates and handed them to Major Hart. He frowned, then nodded. He ordered a small team to prepare for a movement before dawn. He assigned Claire to lead the route selection, though she was not the official leader. It was a subtle change, but the men noticed. The team moved before sunrise to a ridgeline overlooking a narrow pass. The mission was to set a surveillance point and confirm enemy movement. Claire chose the route, avoiding open ground, using low ridges and gullies. Her choices were small, but they kept the team hidden. They set the observation point and waited. The wind picked up. The cold cut. The hours passed. Then a line of figures moved along the pass, careful and controlled. The enemy was shifting positions, likely preparing for a larger move. Claire signaled for silent observation only. No shots, no movement. The point was to see, not to strike. The team held. They returned to base with the information. The commander sent it up the chain. The base prepared for another week of tension. The enemy did not strike that night, but everyone knew it was coming. As the days unfolded, Ethan learned the edges of Claire's story in fragments. The medic mentioned seeing old scars on her torso. Not fresh, not dramatic, but the kind that came from shrapnel and pressure. A tech in the comms room said she spoke in a code set older than their current protocols, as if she had been trained before the system changed. The pattern made sense when Ethan considered the name. He remembered the instructor's words. The call sign was not in any public list. It was not awarded. It was assigned, and only for a specific purpose. It was the signal that all conventional options had been exhausted. One evening, Ethan found himself alone with Claire in the warehouse. The lights were dim. The base was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. He asked her why she had gone silent in the corridor that first night. Why she had not defended herself. She looked at him and said, "Because I needed to see who would move." She paused, then added, "Silence tells you who you can trust." He nodded. It was simple and true. In that moment, he realized her test had not been about her strength. It had been about theirs. The base did not get a respite. 2 nights later, the enemy struck with a coordinated push. They hit the south fence, then the east, then the north, testing for a weak point. The alarm screamed. Teams moved into position. Claire directed a cross shift, moving a reserve team to the north before the enemy could mass. The move saved the fence. Rourke's team engaged on the south side. He held the line, kept his men in cover, did not chase. The discipline was new for him. It was not weakness. It was control. The enemy withdrew after 15 minutes, leaving the base rattled but intact. The commander called a debrief. He asked for input. Rourke spoke, briefly, acknowledging the need to hold. He did not mention Claire, but his change in tone was enough. The commander nodded and ended the meeting. After the debrief, Ethan found Claire by the outer barrier, looking at the trees. The wind tugged at her hood. He asked her if she had ever been in a unit before this one. She said, "I was in a program that doesn't exist on paper." He asked, "Is that what Alpha Zero means?" She said, "It means I'm the last call." He did not ask more. He knew that was all she would give. He also knew the word last carried a weight that could not be reduced to a story. In the days that followed, the base adjusted to her presence. The men who had mocked her now followed her directions. They did not treat her as a friend. They treated her as a force that could save them if they listened. That was enough. Rourke struggled with the change. He wanted to be the one people looked to. He had been that before. Now he had to accept that his impulse needed to be tempered by someone else's calculation. It was not easy. He made small mistakes, caught himself, corrected. The progress was slow but real. Ethan, watching, learned a different lesson. He saw that authority did not have to announce itself. He saw that silence could be a form of control, and that a single word could stop a fight, if the word meant something. The base's tension built to a point. Intelligence reported a possible attack on a nearby outpost, one with a small team and limited supplies. Major Hart decided to send a relief element. He asked for volunteers. Rourke stepped forward. Ethan did too. Claire was assigned to lead the movement despite her unofficial status. They left before sunrise, moving fast. The terrain was rough, the weather cold. Claire took them off the main track and onto a ridgeline, moving through trees and rock to avoid detection. It slowed them, but it kept them hidden. Halfway to the outpost, they heard gunfire in the distance, short and sharp. The outpost was already in contact. Claire increased the pace, keeping the line tight. They moved down a slope and into a low draw, the cover holding. Ethan felt the adrenaline rise. He watched Claire's shoulders, steady, controlled. They reached the outpost as the enemy was withdrawing. The small team was rattled but intact. They had held. Claire coordinated a quick assessment, then ordered a withdrawal back to the main base. She did not push a pursuit. The objective was to stabilize, not to strike. On the return, the enemy tried to cut them off at a creek crossing. Claire saw the movement before anyone else and redirected the line to a higher crossing. The change saved them from a narrow choke point. Rourke saw it and nodded, an unspoken acknowledgement of her judgment. They made it back to base with the outpost team. It was a quiet win, the kind that didn't make headlines, but kept people alive. That night, the base was still for the first time in weeks. The weather cleared, the stars visible through the cold. The men sat in small groups, not talking much. The relief was palpable, but it was also tentative. They knew it could change. Ethan walked to the edge of the compound and found Claire there, looking at the sky. He stood a few feet away, not intruding. After a moment he said, "You saved us more than once." She did not look at him. She said, "I did my job." He said, "It's more than that." She finally turned, her expression still. She said, "Don't put a story on it." It was not dismissive. It was protective. She did not want her actions turned into a myth. He nodded. He understood that myths could be dangerous. Alpha Zero was already won. The next day, the commander called a meeting with the senior team leads and Claire. He told them the base would rotate out in 2 weeks. The relief unit would arrive, and they would hand off. The news was met with quiet acknowledgement. They had been holding too long. It was time. In the days before the rotation, the enemy's pressure eased. They did not vanish, but the probes became less frequent. It was as if they were waiting, watching, recalculating. Claire did not relax. She kept the guard pattern tight. She kept the fallback positions active. She knew that the moment before departure was when mistakes happened. Rourke, with less pressure, began to see her more clearly. He watched how she spoke to the junior men, how she corrected mistakes without humiliating. He saw that she did not seek credit. It shifted his view of her, not into admiration, but into respect. He did not say it out loud. He did not need to. On a grey morning, a small team from higher command arrived with a sealed packet. Major Hart read it and nodded. He called Claire in. They spoke behind closed doors for a long time. When she left, her face was the same, but her shoulders were set differently. Ethan noticed. So did Rourke. Later, Ethan asked the captain if Claire was leaving with them. The captain said he didn't know. He said she might be reassigned. That was all. That night, the base took a final probe. A short burst of fire on the west fence. The teams moved, returned fire, and held. The enemy withdrew. No one was hurt. The base settled. In the quiet after, Claire stood in the warehouse corridor where it had all begun. The yellow light still flickered. The wall still held the stains of damp. She looked at the space with no expression. Ethan stepped into the corridor and stood a few feet away. He said, "They tried to break you the first night." She said, "They were tired and angry." He said, "You were never afraid?" She paused. "I was cautious." He nodded. He understood the difference. The next morning, the relief unit arrived. New faces, new voices, a different energy. The base shifted as it always did with a rotation. Gear was cleaned, logs updated, routes mapped. Claire moved quietly through the process, not drawing attention. She handed off files to Major Hart. She gave a brief to the incoming team leads, short, precise, and to the point. When the time came to leave, she was not on the manifest for the transport. She did not load a bag. She did not say goodbye to most. She stepped into the command post, spoke with Major Hart, and then walked out the side door, hood up, alone. Ethan saw her from across the yard. He started to walk toward her, then stopped. He understood that some people were not meant to be followed. He stood still as she moved toward the outer gate. The guard nodded and opened it. She stepped through, the cold air swallowing her. Rourke stood nearby, watching as well. He did not speak. He had a look in his eyes, one that said he had learned something that could not be put into words. It was not admiration. It was recognition of the cost of being that kind of person. The new unit took over. The base resumed its routine. But the memory of Claire Morgan stayed. It was not a legend told in the open. It was a shift in how they carried themselves. A quiet recalibration. Ethan wrote in his journal the last line he would write about that rotation. Alpha Zero was not a ghost. It was a reminder that silence is not weakness, and that survival depends on listening to the person who sees the line before you do. In the months that followed, he would hear her name again, whispered in a briefing, mentioned in passing by a chief who never explained it. He would never see her again, but the lesson remained. On the final evening before departure, as the transport engines warmed, Ethan stood by the fence, looking out at the trees. The cold air bit his cheeks. He thought about the first night in the corridor, the muzzle against her temple, the filth in the air, and the way one word had stopped the room. He understood now that the word had not stopped the room by magic. It had stopped it because the people who heard it knew there were consequences they could not see. He turned to the base behind him, to the men moving gear, to the quiet discipline that had taken root. He felt, for the first time, that he belonged, not because he had proven himself with noise, but because he had chosen to speak the right word at the right moment. The transport lifted off under a pale sky. The base shrank, then disappeared behind the ridge. The war moved on, as it always did. The names shifted. The call signs changed. The world kept turning. Yet in the mind of those who had been there, a single image remained. A woman standing still under a broken light, refusing to flinch, refusing to beg, and the voice of a rookie cutting through the air to say the only thing that could stop a mistake from becoming a disaster. Silence answered after that. A silence that was not empty, but full of the kind of understanding that did not need speech.